See, there's spiritual power. Spiritual power is greater than material power. It can move the miracles. It can move the essence of what we are all about, the universe. Once there is true peace in your mind, you will float with the skies, with the stars and the heavens. You will visit all of them. And that'll be your peace. You will understand peace when your spirit visits those stars every night, or listening to just listening to even to water trickling down. That's peace. That is true peace. Even to hear the rustling of the leaves, that's peace. And when you hear the song of the birds, that's peace. And no interruption in your dreams, no interruption in your life. That's peace, beautiful peace.
Good evening, people. We're coming to you from the CCTV here in Salem, Oregon. And this evening, we have a couple of good guests, and that will entertain you all very well. One is David Liberty in the Portland, Oregon, and Dean Warner from Portland, Oregon. And they're very interesting gentlemen. And myself, I'm Calvin Hecocta, and right now I'm living in Beaverton, and in Klamath Falls. And that area is my home, Beatty, Oregon, and but I'm having a very good time over here on the in the Willamette Valley, so probably stick around here for a while. But I enjoy doing these introductions, interviews, and just sitting and visiting with friends. So we'll start our evening with each one kind of talking about what they do as a way of keeping busy and doing the things that of interest that they enjoy. We're going to start with David.
Thank you, Calvin. It's a real honor to be here.
Good.
It's great to see the studio and the whole operation here down in Salem, and I really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, I have a program that I co-host up in Gresham on Metro East Community Media, and had Calvin on my show, one of my best guests ever, Calvin. So it really is great to come down here and give back. Calvin, I'm involved in so many things, I don't know where to start, but my employer is the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. So I'm helping to advance my treaty right to fish. I'm an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Northeast Oregon, for those of you who don't know. And we have a treaty right to fish on the Columbia River from McNary Dam down to Bonneville Dam. And what comes along with that right to fish is the responsibility to take care of the fishery that provides your food. So the tribes got together back in the late 70s and decided it's really a lot of work for each of us individually to lobby Congress and to work on these fishing issues that we all share in common. We have the same treaty right with the Yakima, the Warm Springs, and the Nimiipuu, the Nez Perce. So we all got together, those 4 tribal groups, and formed the commission. And the goal of the commission is to bring the salmon back to the rivers that they once lived and to protect the habitat where they live.
Oh, great.
And yeah, it's a simple mission, but it gets pretty complicated with all the issues you've got to contend with. You've got dams, of course, which are a major impediment to the fish. You've got pesticides that are being poured onto the soil, drifts into the water. Sometimes the pesticides go right into the water. You've got issues with water rights and competing water interests. I know of some cases where landowners would actually drain a stream dry to fulfill their water rights and giving no right to the river itself, which is really sad. And you've got issues with Canada. The Columbia River comes through Canada. So they've got their own system up there that they deal with, and whatever water makes it through the border then becomes our problem. If it's polluted or whatever it's got in it, it becomes the United States problem at that point. So we're dealing with renegotiation of a major treaty with Canada regarding the Columbia River. Water allocation was the issue before. Now the issue, well, the tribes are bringing the issue of the fish, the needs of the fish, that has to be a part of that major treaty agreement between Canada and the United States. So the sport fishery is another issue that we contend with on the Columbia River. They are starting to come around now and can see how treaty rights can help support their right as sport fishermen, their ability as sport fishermen to fish. The treaty right, as it turns out, is one of the best ways to protect the fishery on the Columbia River and in the entire basin. So sport fisheries used to be against tribal fishing rights, it was the formal policy of the state of Oregon to eliminate the tribal fishery, written policy. They had to take it off the books, but it was still remembered historically by those who started the policy. And the sport fishermen now are starting to see that they're becoming an ally more and more. So that's good. But now, more recently, we've got issues with what the trains are carrying through the Columbia River down the gorge. The coal trains and the oil trains. They want to take a lot of coal from Wyoming and send it to China so they can pollute their air worse than it already is, which, if you don't know, it's some of the worst pollution in the world. I've seen pictures. So they want to pollute their air more with our coal, but they want the coal to go through the Columbia River Gorge, and the trains release dust as they bounce, and coal dust. And Dean indicated they may be covering those trains, but the coal dust is toxic, and if a fire were to start in a pile of it, I don't know what would happen exactly. I know it's a problem. And the oil trains have had some major wrecks back east and in the Midwest, so we know how dangerous those are. And if something were to happen with the train to spill into the Columbia River, you couldn't clean it up, really. There's trains running on both sides of the river all the way up and down, it seems like. So it's really vulnerable to a spill if it were to occur. So the Fish Commission has a lot of issues that they deal with, and they've got a lot of staff. We have a team of attorneys. Our fish science department has several PhDs and a lot of fish scientists. We even have a group over in Hagerman working with Idaho State University, a genetics lab, and they're doing genetic research down there in Hagerman. And I told them down there in Hagerman, personally, I said, hey, you guys, while you're at it, would you grow me one of those warm water salmon? So when global climate change hits, the salmon will be able to survive. And we all kind of got a laugh out of it, but in the back of my mind, I really worry that the global climate filling our skies with CO2, we're slowly committing suicide as a species, as human beings, but we don't really have the impetus to stop. And we're motivated by it. We're not motivated by clean air, we're motivated by money. As human species in general, I mean, not all of us, of course, but money is really the charge that is leading us down that road to self-destruction. I hate to say it, but it's true. So the commission is funded by the Bonneville Power Administration, and we were talking about this earlier. They are probably responsible for the destruction of more fish habitat than any agency in the federal government, although they're supposedly not a federal agency. They have to meet all the regulations of the federal government, and they're managed by the federal government. They have to meet all the federal regulations. So they're kind of the federal government, the Bonneville Power. But they fund the commission, and even though their mission seems to be at odds with ours, we're working together to try and bring salmon back to the rivers, and we've had some success of late. There's been improvements in the numbers. Especially this fall Chinook run has been one of the biggest ever. So we're really encouraged by that. And the tribal hatchery management, I want to give credit to the tribal hatcheries that have changed the way they raise their little fingerlings. You know, the state took these long bathtubs of concrete and would just feed them off the top, and they put nets over to keep the osprey and any predator away from the little guys to make them get big and fat. Well, the tribes put them in a natural curved tub with rocks on the bottom and with branches that gives them cover, so that if a bird of prey comes down, they actually have a place to hide. And they feed them from underneath, so they go down for their food instead of coming up to the surface all the time. There's food up there, yes, but there's food down there in natural systems. So they eat down beneath, and it makes them a healthier salmon when they're released and ready to go out into the wild. So I really have been excited about the tribal fishery management of the hatcheries. Since they've taken over, they've revolutionized the hatcheries as far as I'm concerned. But the state still, you go to any state hatcheries, they still got the same water troughs, and the guy throws the food down and they all come running to the surface to get the food. And the old system of hatcheries has been a failure. But they keep doing it and doing it and doing it, because when you put 1 million fingerlings in the system, something's bound to come back. So it's simply the total numbers. They just inundate the system with all these little fingerlings. There's bound to be something come back, but it's not a very well managed system. And the tribes are showing that we have a better way. We can do it more naturally and create a better fish that's more ready to go to the ocean and come back 4 years later.
Yeah.
So hatchery management has been a good thing that the commission and the tribes have been able to change. And I want to mention too that the commission runs the StreamNet library, which is where I work. I'm the assistant director of the library. We are the best source of information on Columbia River salmon, but we have salmon materials from all around the Eastern Pacific, Canada, Alaska, even some Russian and Japanese documents. They have anadromous fish over there too that are very similar to our salmon. So Atlantic salmon have been introduced into our system through hatcheries, through fish farms. So Atlantic salmon is a scourge, and they are not as fit as Pacific salmon. So that's been a problem with the fish farms, which impact the whole ocean and river systems. The amount of fecal material that comes out of those farms that they raise the fish in, and they feed them a steady diet, and they feed them coloring so the meat will be the right color, because if they didn't color the meat, they would come out of those fish farms white.
Oh, okay.
They're not getting the nutrition that they would if they were naturally in the system. So they practically have to paint the meat to make it the color you want it. So the fish farms are not a good way to make food for people. They destroy the environment below the nets, where it kills everything down on the bottom of the benthic layer, that's a fancy word I learned because I work in the library now. Where the ground meets the water, the benthic layer is very sensitive. And once you cover it with fecal material, it just grows algae, which has been seen quite a bit in the Willamette River lately, that blue-green algae that's growing in the Willamette.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking back to earlier this summer. I read an article about a group of swimmers who swim the Willamette River right there in downtown Portland. Every day, every morning, they would go out and swim a lap on the Willamette River. And I found out about that blue-green algae. And even back then, I didn't think it was a good idea. But now, there's reports of dogs that have died from drinking the water near that blue-green algae growth. So fortunately, the Columbia, as far as I know, does not have that problem with the blue-green algae. But the Willamette, clearly, the Willamette has always been a problem since development came, and they tried to clean it up, but this blue-green algae is a sign that they have not quite cleaned it up to what they need.
Still a Superfund site.
And
the harbor.
are they working to clean? Are they cleaning that Superfund site?
Well, they're being sued because they haven't done what they said they were going to do.
Yeah.
And so, clearly dragging their feet, and the harbor remains in terrible shape. So.
Yeah. And I know there's fish advisories to, if you're going to fish in that area, to one fish a week or something like that from that area for safety reasons. But there are warnings. We have warnings for the fish that we eat. The tribes have recommended that we not eat the skin or the fat of our salmon. And that's really hard for people to do. It is really hard not to eat the skin or the fat. And a lot of people just disregard the warnings and eat the skin and the fat. And our tribal members eat a lot more salmon than your typical American. So when you have a tradition that's so ingrained and so much a part of you, to not eat fish, or even to not eat part of the fish, is really a radical change for your system and for you and for the people around you. So it's been hard to adjust. And I'll find myself scraping the fat and the skin off, but then I'll eat the skin after I scrape it off because I love the skin so much. I don't eat the fat, but I'll eat the skin. So it's tough to see warnings and hear about warnings all over the nation for fish consumption. So many lakes and rivers support fish, but the fish have enough mercury or other toxins in them that they can survive. But if you eat very many of them, they'll start to accumulate in your system and you'll get mercury poisoning. So it's really sad condition for the fish right now, and something radical needs to happen. We need to change our lifestyle. We need to cut our reliance on fossil fuels and coal and natural gas, and use more solar and wind energy. And even hydropower is a sinner because of what it's done to our fish. It's very hard for a salmon to climb up a fish ladder. And it's especially harder for a lamprey to climb up a fish ladder. And they didn't even know till recently that the lamprey can climb up a steep stainless steel ramp with a little water on it. They can climb up a stainless steel ramp with their sucker and go right up it, no problem. But concrete with all the little rocks and holes and pits, their mouth can't grip onto that. So the lamprey have taken a considerable hit as far as their population in the Columbia River. And they were a very important traditional food for my people, for lots of Columbia River people. And the salmon were more accepted by the population. Everybody wanted to eat salmon, so it was really a concern. But only a few people ate eels. We used to call them eels. Now we kind of changed over to lamprey. Some people still call them eels, but lamprey is the formal term. And our tribe has a tribal member who's doing great work on lamprey, a guy, Dr. David Close, is a professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. He and I attended school together at Oregon State. We're related. And he has been doing groundbreaking work on lamprey and how they smell and what they're smelling, and genetic work that is way beyond anything that I could explain. And David tries to explain it to me, but yeah, that sounds interesting, but it's way over my head. But it's good. We have an expert on lamprey. He is helping the commission. He wants the commission to start a special lamprey project that he's proposed. So it's nice to have tribal members who, although he's in Vancouver, he's helping out down at the commission, and he wants to bring lamprey back to the Umatilla Basin, which is where our tribe has our reservation. Mm-hmm. So that would be nice to someday be able to take lamprey on our reservation again, which was traditionally happened all the time. So I could go on and on, Calvin, but it'd help, if you want to guide me, or is there anything you need to know or have any questions, I'm sure I could answer it.
I think that's one thing that's stuck in my mind right now is the blue-green algae in the Willamette. And the salmon that goes up the Willamette, it has to take that in.
And the large salmon that are coming up would have a better chance than the little fingerlings going down.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, their health is more sensitive, and I would think that it would affect the little ones that are going, the smolts that are going out to the sea.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's in that water is going to be affected by that blue-green algae.
Mm-hmm.
And after hearing about the dogs dying, I was hoping that it would be more serious of an issue, and there's still some mention of it in the news, but it doesn't seem like people are up in arms about it or anything. They're screaming or tearing their hair out.
Yeah.
But it's a tragedy. To the river, what it does to the river, you know, we may not feel it, but the river sure feels it. It's having a big impact and probably raising the temperature of the water and slowing it down. And
Yeah.
I'm not an expert. I'm an expert on a lot of different things, but not on blue-green algae. But I just know it's bad.
Yeah, I've seen that on the Klamath Lake. The Klamath Lake is full of it.
Oh.
And you don't see it until you get up close. And the lake looks kind of nice and blue. And you get up close and it's all green.
Hmm.
And you see all this thing moving around in there.
Well, I understand that some of the cause of that is phosphates
Phosphate.
from soap and detergent
Uh-huh.
that gets into the system. And phosphates have always had a bad impact on the river. But this stuff that people ingest shows up in the water. Birth control pills show up in the water system as hormones. All the aspirin and stuff that comes through our system and goes in the toilet shows up in the river because the water treatment plants can't take out those little chemicals like that. The prescription drugs that go through our system, they all end up in the river. So people are wondering why salmon below Hanford are switching from males to females as they age. Well, people are saying it's something to do with hormones because they're changing their sexual identity as they grow. So that's pretty scary. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know about. It's one of the impacts of development on the river system.
Wow.
Scary.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But because I work in the library, I get information from researchers and I get information from newspapers that we receive and new books that come in. So I can as they come across my desk, I can review a little bit, look at a paragraph or read the conclusions. So it really helps me to keep in touch with what's going on up and down the system and what the commission is doing. Well, I've always had an interest anyway. So my curiosity keeps me informed. It's what's going on with my treaty right to fish. I want to protect that.
Yeah.
And your treaty right to fish doesn't mean much if there's no fish to treaty right fish for.
Sure. Well, that is a lot of information, and for our audience, I hope that that gave a little information that will help you do more study yourself, which is really important, and that leads into kind of helping your spirit wake up, and your brain starts to wake up and take a good look at the things that are happening to the rivers and the lakes and the fish and all the other beings that live there. Certainly need everybody's help to take care of them, and which is part of our responsibility which is what's learned is that these beings like the fish and lamprey and all the others from the waters and the four-legged, they've made a commitment to offer themselves to keep us alive. In giving back, it's our responsibility to make sure that those families are going to continue as well into the 7th generation. So with that, we will take a little break and come back after a little bit. And again, we're at the CCTV, and this is the program that's called Wake the People. Thank you.
And all of a sudden you realize all those things you didn't plan for, all the dams that didn't have passage, didn't have ladders up, they didn't have protection down. You know, all the water we take out of the river for irrigation, and the changes we cause for, you know, bringing in different kinds of pollutants and temperature and new species. And so I think obviously it gives us lots of opportunity to improve things.
It didn't take very long to realize that potential for anadromous fish passage would be a big question that we would have to address at relicensing.
One of the biggest reasons to get passage at dams is related to climate change. Out in the valley of the Willamette River Basin, there was not a lot of spawning historically, but there's even less now. And as the water warms, even just a small amount, what little habitat there is below the dams is going to go away.
The fish weren't coming back at the time they should have been arriving at the base of the dam. And what folks found at the time was that the water temperatures coming out of the base of the dam were much colder than they had been historically. And that really affected the adult migration, so much so that the fish didn't come back to the basin dam until September, in comparison to, say, May and June historically.
Our Section 18 requirements as part of our license that were put on by the Federal Fisheries Passage Agencies are requiring us to develop sustainable and harvestable populations of these 3 anadromous fish, and then also past resident fish that want to go up and downstream, such as bull trout.
The primary opposition was the fear that the dams would destroy the fish runs on the Cowlitz River. The Cowlitz in the 1960s was the largest undammed tributary of the lower Columbia River and had very strong runs of salmon, steelhead, and sea-run cutthroat trout in it. And the local people and the people of the state of Washington enjoyed those fish, those fisheries, and wanted to retain them.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back to the Wake the People show, and hope you enjoyed the first portion. And I will continue on with further discussion and introduce Dean Warner and have him talk about his program and what he does in this world and to make it a better place. And I'd like to do that now.
Thank you, Calvin. And my name's Dean Warner, and I have a small production company with my wife, Mary. It's called Sanctuary Video. And, you know, we believe that the earth is our sanctuary. Got to take care of it.
Very good.
Oh, yeah.
So we wanted to include that, you know, from top to bottom, and that starts with the name of your company, I suppose, as far as we're concerned.
I like it.
And the last project that we worked on was called Rites of Passage. And the subtext is the importance of protecting listed anadromous fish. And
Very
it
good.
was an amazing project. We learned a lot. We were hired by NOAA to do it, and they're having problems in California. Unlike our rivers up here that have passage for fish up and down, some of the projects work better than others. It depends on the project and what Mother Earth has given them to work with. But in California, they have none. They have no fish passage at all. And so what the people in California out of Sacramento were hoping to do by hiring us was to get a look at the history, however flawed, of what's taking place up here, how to get the fish above the dams and how to get them to return, and to influence the politics down there. The dam licenses are up for relicensing now, and so they were using this project as a little bit of pressure to say, if you want to relicense, if you want to get your license renewed for the use of the water that you've got behind these dams, which is part of the public trust that's destroyed 98% of the traditional salmon habitat, then you're going to have to do some remediation. You're going to have to take some steps. And so we traveled up to Washington to look at the Cowlitz, and we traveled up to the Clackamas to look at the program that they have there. We traveled to the South Fork of the Mackenzie and Fall Creek on the Mackenzie, and another small dam up on that river system to look at what they have done, and also the Round Butte Pelton Dam project. And what we found was a real mixed bag. The people are spending millions and millions of dollars on these mitigation projects, and there's been some success, but all of these projects have been flawed. And so part of what we were offering to the people of California was, this is something for you to build on. We've got flawed projects here. You need to move beyond. You've got to go beyond this if you expect to fulfill your duty to the public trust and protect these fish. You have to go beyond. And so we were pretty proud of the people that participated in this project. Again, it's called Rites of Passage.
Is it out?
It is out, and NOAA's using it all over California in the way that NOAA does, but you can take a look at it on our website. It's sanctuaryvideo.com, and you can learn about what we saw and what we learned from the fish biologists that work for the Corps and for the different power companies around.
Well, just for California, the Eel River has stopped running. The Eel River doesn't have enough water to flow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a major water system in California. And right across the border, they're getting monsoons in Phoenix, and they're getting snow in North Dakota all last week. I mean, this was all happening at the same time. Drought, monsoon, snow, all in the same week. Not that far from themselves.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, there were just 120 people, or 120 countries represented in New York at the new climate change
summit
UN that they just did. And it's, like we're the first generation to have experienced global warming, and maybe the last one that's going to be able to do something about it. So there's a lot of pressure that people are thankfully going beyond and realizing that our government is not really paying attention to what we want and the things that are important to us: the public trust of our fish, clean water, and
clean air.
Clean air, and we're seeing that play out in our fisheries. It's global warming is a real big player when it comes to the temperature of the water that affect the fish. And in California, it's even worse than it is here. And so they have to really, you know, if they want those fish to survive, they can't have the fish spending time in the lower valleys. They got to get them up above, you know, those impoundments and into the cooler water where they can do what they were meant to do. And we were fortunate enough to be able to put together a 50-minute program that shows, you know, the projects that exist now as a starting point. And with all its flaws, we need to move beyond that if we're serious about protecting this precious resource that we have.
Oh yeah, I was amazed hearing news about the worst drought in California history and seeing a bottle of Arrowhead water, California spring water. Arrowhead is bottling, I don't know how many bottles of Arrowhead spring water they're bottling in California, but it was up here in Oregon. We're drinking spring water from California while they've got a drought down there. I just could not believe the irony in that. I can get spring water in Oregon, but California can't get their own spring water because it's being shipped to Oregon. Of course, California wanted to take Columbia River water.
Wouldn't let them do
and
that.
ship it down to California.
Nestle wanted it.
Yeah. Well, Nestle still wants it up
Sure.
at Cascade Locks.
Yeah.
That's another issue on the river that we're dealing with.
Russ never sleeps.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear about the work you're doing, Dean, with that project.
Well, there's a lot to love out there. I mean, we've got this beautiful home that we've been given and everything that we need to get along well. And
Yeah.
it doesn't belong to a few guys. It belongs to everybody. And, you know, we're doing what we can to look out after it. But, you know, we've got these obstacles of, you know, the people that want to monopolize the resources, and then the rest of us end up paying for it. And it's not right. You know, we have to protect those things that we hold dear. And the salmon are, you know, one of the most important ones for those of us that live on the Columbia here.
Oh, yeah.
The power companies, it's not their resource to destroy.
No.
And the timber companies, you know, we have to make sure that they're helping to keep the water clean with their practices, you know, so we don't have siltation. And
Well, I've always contended that the only eco-terrorism I ever saw was a clear cut. That is my definition of eco-terrorism, a clear cut. But not everybody agrees with me.
That gives me a little thought about when I went to Mount St. Helens a couple weekends ago, and we were looking that area over, and they was talking about the devastation of that explosion there, and all around it for miles, I was looking at the clear cuts all around that whole area.
One of the biggest clear cuts
Talk about
in the United
devastation.
States. Right there on the Lewis River, just by south of Mount St. Helens, is one of the biggest clear cuts in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But Canada and Alaska have outdone Washington for clear cuts. If you look at Admiralty Island in Alaska, they devastated. They took every piece of wood out of an entire river valley. They clear cut an entire river valley. You can see it from outer space. Whew, I can't believe the extent that some people go to try and destroy this earth. It just amazes me. And the fracking and the tar sands are a couple other big issues that have a big impact on nature that is kind of hidden, that people don't see. To extract tar from sand, you have to kill a lot of water. And once that water is used, it can't be put back into the system. They have these gigantic holding ponds up there that they try and settle out the sediment. But it's just so fine, it'll always be polluted. And the fracking, of course, happens underground, is unseen. And even the scientists who are people doing the fracking don't know where all the stuff is going once it's underground. You could have fractures, you don't have any idea if it's going into the groundwater or not. But they have the money, they have the permits, they can go in and do that regardless of environmental laws. It's really sad. I've been reading a book by my friend Mary Wood, a professor of law down at the University of Oregon. And the book is called Nature's Trust. I would encourage all of your viewers, Calvin, to read that book.
Nature's Trust.
Local girl. She grew up in Vancouver, Portland, and now lives in Eugene, teaches at the law school down there. And she reveals a lot of the tricks that these big corporations used to get permission to pollute. The EPA has the responsibility to protect the environment, but they also have the ability to provide permits to people who want to pollute the environment. They can allow a certain amount of pollution. So they write permits for people to pollute the earth. Despite their main mission to protect the earth, they're doing the exact opposite, which is incredible.
There have been some films that have been created about the fracking and, you know, people's water, and when you turn it on, you can light it on fire. And, you know, at that point, don't you stop? At that point, don't you say, okay, this wasn't a good idea at least, and knock it off?
No, you put that scientific uncertainty, you put doubt in people's mind. How do you know that it was fracking that caused this water to ignite? How do you know that putting carbon dioxide in the air is going to hurt the earth? By scientific doubt has been one of the scourge of the environmental movement, because maybe you can't find one scientist somewhere who doesn't believe in global warming. Well, I can find a tribal member who believes that the Washington Redskins is a perfectly good name and they should have mascots that are caricatures of Indian people. So not everybody thinks the way I do, but I do have some strong convictions.
Well, I think that most people think the way that you do. And
I would hope so.
That's why I'm really happy that we're doing this show, because we can start to understand, you know, yeah, I can resonate with that. You know, we all want to be healthy, we all want to be happy, we all want to, you know, have clean water, health care, and education for our kids, and we have much more in common.
Oh, yes.
And so, you know, I think that your ideas are probably not as underrepresented as you think.
We want it for the seventh generation, like Calvin mentioned that earlier. That I recently heard that a council back east had one member of their council that spoke for the seventh generation. That was his charge, to speak for the people that would be here way into the future. I thought that was a brilliant idea. One person assigned to protect the future. Well, it's not the case anymore. We've got more and more people in the extraction industry that are hell-bent on pulling everything out of the ground that they can, and the last drop of, so they can make a profit on it, regardless of the impacts on the environment.
We've got so much dough that you know, they can permeate.
They can buy permits from the EPA.
Right on down to you know, school board elections. You know, the Koch brothers. And,
political influence.
Put that money right on into there, and we're seeing them in the Merkley campaign this time.
Yeah, they're in Oregon.
And that's those guys. They're the fracksters.
Yeah, and Dick Cheney, too. He was one of the worst. The book Nature's Trust talks about the role that Dick Cheney played and how many appointees to high-level government agencies came out of the oil industry under the Bush administration. It was just staggering. And Monsanto, too. There were a lot of staff who came from Monsanto to the agency, and then they would go back to Monsanto. And you see that with politicians all the time. They'll quit and then go to work for this agency that they'd been lobbying for all along.
Yep.
So there's a lot of backroom deals that we'll never know about. The money just has so much power.
That's it, and there aren't that many of them. You know, we're not going to let them run this state. We're going to find a way to change that. You know, you guys are both out there swinging. You know, we're all doing what we can, and I think it's going to have an effect because they've got a big lie to hold up, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. It's really crumbling, I think, underneath them.
Like the tobacco industry, they held out for the longest time and finally had to put warnings on their packages.
That's pretty amazing.
It's happening again, even with the CO2, releases of CO2 coming from coal-fired power plants, cars. Lots of things produce CO2 in the atmosphere. And our scientists are saying that we can only survive so much CO2 in the environment. And I'm kind of worried. I noticed in the Columbia Gorge there was a die-off of some trees. And I don't know if it was alder or what it was. I got to pay closer attention. There's a die-off of trees in the gorge. And there's also red tip illness that is affecting fir trees and pine trees in the gorge. And I know that the lichen in the gorge is severely shrunken because the entire Columbia River Basin funnels everything, all the heavy metals that are airborne, down into the Columbia Gorge. That's the lowest point in the entire basin. So all the gases that sit above ground funnel down to the gorge. So surprisingly, we have a high concentration of pollution right there in Hood River area, which is where I live. And you'd think it's one of the most beautiful places around, but it comes to find out that it is very polluted because of its location as a funnel where the water all comes right down the gorge. Well, all the heavy particles that are in the air come down too.
I've looked at those numbers. We had been kayakers, in the earlier part of our life. We bounced down streams, and it's how I'd explore the different canyons in our state. I've pretty much seen them all.
All right.
And so we'd pay attention to that water data, and we got volumes from the state. And part of along with the river flows that came down in those books were the particulates of different things that traveled down the lower Columbia. And there are things like strontium 90 and
thank you, Hanford.
And those numbers were dynamic. It wasn't like they were measuring the same thing every day, of sediment that just laid there. This is stuff that's moving through. And so, it's kind of an unseen world, but it exists, and nonetheless, and it's like you say, that's 250,000 miles of watershed, and all that stuff in the huge valley makes its way down, and we need to look at that and take some steps if possible. Sometimes it seems like it's just too big a thing, but everybody does their part. And whatever gifts you have out there, put them to work, and things get done that way.
Well, my friend Mary Wood gave a great analogy. A woman lived on the coast in a house, and she was told that a storm was approaching. Well, the weather was sunny out, it was nice, so she didn't think very much of it. Got another warning, the storm is approaching, you should probably think about evacuating. She said, oh, I think my house is pretty strong, I don't think I need to evacuate. So then they finally get the evacuation order. Everybody must leave their home. Well, we've lived through storms before. I don't think this is really going to be a problem. I'm going to stay in my house. And then the storm hits and kills her and wipes her house flush with the ground. Now, in a slow motion, we are doing that same thing. We have a storm approaching, and we can see it on the horizon. And some of us see it better than others, but we know it's coming. And what are we going to do? Are you going to just let it approach until it's so close you can finally say, oh, now we have to do something because it's just right there. That's all I can do is act. But then it's too late, because by that time we won't be able to breathe. You know, the air won't suffice us. We won't have enough oxygen. So now is the time that we need to act, because we can see the storm coming, but we're not doing anything. We're saying that we lived through the last storm, so we can live through this one. We're trying to rationalize our inaction, and it's not going to work. We've got to do something as a species, or we're not going to be on this planet anymore.
There were some pretty good reports that came out today about the summit and what people are doing, and there's some pretty amazing work out there, which I was happy to hear about. And one thing that that I've been wondering about that I don't know much about is the gathering power from tidal bore. They just have a project that is just getting started in Oregon, and they're testing it now. I think it's out around Newport or something. What do you guys know about that? Do you think it's a good idea, or, you know, can it be a help? Is it sustainable or destructive, or?
Yeah, we kind of haven't talked about the ocean that much, but there's so much salt water that to try and keep any mechanical hardware operating in salt water has incredible amount of difficulties. I'm an engineer. Don't let anybody know I'm an engineer, but I know a lot about engineering.
I won't tell anybody.
And the rust accumulates out in salt water, even stainless steel. So that's the main problem they have with any operating system, mechanical operating system in the salt water in the sea. You can't keep it running; it seizes up.
Would it be viable if they were able to, you know, overcome that?
Well, the best thing I've seen was a capsule that just had one piston coming out of the top to a parachute on the surface. So the parachute would be carried up and down with the waves, and then the single piston would be generating electricity,
right,
you know, magnetic,
going across the coil or something,
as it goes up and down. And that seemed like something that was simple and could work in an ocean conditions. But I haven't heard much about it since then. That was a while ago I heard about that.
There's one question I wanted to ask Calvin was, you know, how can people settle down and try to get into a space where they'll know what to do and you know, maybe get some help in being pointed in the right direction within themselves.
One of the things that really helped my spirit is finding the right people to be around. Did you find yourself listening too much to the half-truths in this world that's happening right now, by the media as well as the political system, from the president all the way down through the state governments? The half-truths that people live with right now is finally starting to stir them a little bit, to say, maybe I'm being lied to. Maybe it's time I find the truth somewhere. And in different working groups, there are groups that are sincere and truthful about what they're trying to do. And that's what I seek, and as well as trying to find the right materials to read and then be active with those groups. And that raises the spirit, and also gives me more incentive to learn and be able to stand out and be able to meet people and let them know that they're being lied to and by their government. And that's the most important piece that I find that helps. I started out myself with many questions in my communities, the Klamath area, and the half-truths and all of this, till I started finding the people to be around that was strong enough to research and question the people in charge of all of these different areas. And by watching them do that and learning from them, that's how I grew. That, hey, this is working, to be a voice for the people. And once that started, then I was okay. And then more people started paying attention as well. And so I think we're about finished with our show for the evening. I certainly appreciate the information that the both of you shared, and
Glad to.
we can continue this at another time. And I know I sure appreciated it, and helped me to wake up again a little bit more. So you have been watching the show, Wake the People. Again, I guess it's David and Dean, and hope you enjoyed what we presented this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.